Hi again. Let's see here. Okay, so you talk about how the BP oil spill was because of deregulation, and you go on to talk about McDonald's having poisonous cups. I haven't heard about the second story, but I'll take your word for it. You seem like you are honest, intellectually honest. Um, so my point here is that well, especially McDonald's, but also the oil industry. These are both extremely regulated industries. So you have here what you're arguing for, massive government regulation, and the problems are still occurring. So maybe there's some failure in the state regulation here. Of course, food is one of the most heavily regulated industries, the Food and Drug Administration. And of course, a company such as McDonald's selling, products that are poisonous, even if it was just a mistake or whatever, this is criminal negligence, and they should be taken to court, for any damages that occur. Absolutely, right? Just because I am a huge fan of the market economy and the free market doesn't mean I think that everybody in the free market is an angel, right? In fact, the reason why we need the market economy is because people are inherently not perfect, especially by, say, Christian standards. And I say Christian here because, good or bad, these are moral value judgment terms, right? So we need, some basis of morality. And Christian values are of selflessness. So that's an example of, anyway, I mean, we can consider any rubric of value scales. So, yes, conditions in the 19th century were objectively bad compared to today. People labored for, 25 cents an hour or whatever, and even with deflation, that's not a lot of money, right? But, that does us no good to say, yes, 200 years later, after, so much progress, the internet, cars, whatever, things got better. Well, of course they did, right? Even if we had lived in a totalitarian state like some communist Russia, even with progress being as stilted as that, we would still have progress, right? So during the 19th century in America, during the period of laissez-faire capitalism, we saw standards of living for the poor skyrocket. This has never happened anywhere except in conditions of laissez-faire capitalism. And you talk about child labor, and I don't think there's anything dirty or perverse about working. I don't think we need to protect children from labor like we have to protect them from drugs or pornography. I think that if a child wants to work, that if it's their decision to work, that's a great thing. It's great for the child. It grants them financial independence. They understand the value of a work ethic, and I don't think we need to shield our children from that. I think the sooner somebody wants to work, the better, because a job is your identity. It's so powerful for progressing in the world. You save up money, you can do a lot of things with it. Buy a car or start a business or whatever you want, right? And of course, child slave labor, which sadly does occur in the world today and has occurred in the past. It's not the same thing as a child choosing to work, right? Like, for example, a kid with a paper route, is that exploitative or is that an opportunity, So the reason why children in the third world choose to work in factories is because they and their families are starving to death, and this is a way out for them. So if we prohibit children from working in these situations, we condemn them to death, right? They don't live our comfortable Western lifestyles. Likewise, in the 19th century, families did not have the luxury of their children not working. They were too poor. Ultimately, individuals are best suited to make their own decisions. How can we say whether someone should work or not? Working conditions during this time were bad, objectively. But how were they 50 or 100 years before then, right? People chose to move from the farms to the cities because working for 12 hours a day at a factory was better than spending 16 hours a day scratching a living out of the dirt. Better working conditions come at the expense of wages. It does no good to have a safe working environment at a factory if it means that you're taking home so little money that you can't feed your family, that they're malnourished. Workers during this period chose poor working conditions in favor of higher wages. you are going to tell me that you, 160 years later, having never met these people, without knowing the situation, why they needed the money, are wiser than them, can say that they should have worked for less money in better conditions? And that's what regulating to save for better conditions does. It says that you are in a better position than an employee to judge whether or not they should work or for how much money or in what conditions. And I think this is a fatal conceit, hubris. Working conditions for the poor in this time were ameliorated not by unions or politicians, but by capitalists. Capital accumulation led to higher productivity, which in turn led to higher wages. And in economics, the causation between productivity and wages is very well understood. So higher productivity led to higher wages, or, if the employee wants, better, safer working conditions. You mentioned that, a person died on their job. Well, people, spend so much time working that even today, even in great working conditions, a lot of people die on the job. Yes, there were tragic accidents. It wasn't a great time, but you have to look at the direction that society was trending in. And were things better 200 years ago or 50 years before that? Did the Industrial Revolution represent a decline in society, or was it, the start of our skyrocket upwards? You move on to the welfare state, which is tangentially related to the conversation. Social Security, which you seem to be in favor of, is currently a transfer of wealth from the relatively poor to the relatively rich. So I'm not sure why you're so keen on this. And then we get on to talk about the New Deal and the Great Depression. And I think this is really core of understanding, these issues. I think in many ways the Great Depression was sort of the creation myth for American socialism. Of course, 1929 wasn't the first recession in American economic history. For example, in 1920, there was a brief panic about a 6-month downturn, okay? But at the time, Coolidge, or whoever the guy before Coolidge was president, he was a minimalist. He didn't believe in, big government like Hoover did or like FDR did, so he did nothing. And what happened? The economy corrected itself. The economy rebounded. And unfortunately, when Hoover was at the helm, he tried the opposite approach. He tried everything in his power to fix the recession. And the result was it turned into the longest and most crippling depression in American history. And really, the New Deal started under Hoover, and FDR simply continued Hoover's policies. I highly recommend A Country Squire Goes to Washington by John T. Flynn. It's available online for free. You can get it on the Mises Institute, mises.org, mises.org. There's a PDF for download, and it's a biography of Franklin Delano Roosevelt that really gives some insight into his character, and it talks about this. So I think at this point I have to introduce the Austrian theory of the trade cycle, and it's a little beyond the scope of this YouTube video, but basically, recessions, depressions, the business cycle happens because of bank credit expansion, and what happens is resources are reallocated to higher order capital goods, and so it's really tough to explain. So basically, interest rates on the market are determined by the time preference of consumers. And I don't want to get too much economic gobbledygook in here. Basically, interest rates are set by how much money people want to save as opposed to consume, right? Whether they're living for today or living for tomorrow. And so bank credit expansion fools entrepreneurs into thinking that people are saving more money, when in fact they're not. And the more money people save, the more they can invest in, factories or whatever, capital goods. So bank credit expansion fools entrepreneurs into thinking that people are saving more money, so they reallocate to capital goods. And basically what happens is it's malinvestment. So entrepreneurs en masse, entrepreneurs are basically very good at forecasting, right? That's how they make money. They predict the future, and it's very tough to do. So the bad ones go broke, and the good ones keep doing it. So overall, people profit. The economy is a positive sum game. So it's not like there's half of the entrepreneurs are winners and half are losers. Most are winners or break even. A few lose. Some lose. A good number, but not a majority. And so what happens is, all of a sudden, all these pretty bright entrepreneurs, they all start making errors. They all start showing losses. They all start losing. Why? Because they're fooled by the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is printing money. So the way to solve this is by doing nothing. When you try to alleviate the recession via, a New Deal, via Obama stimulus, what happens is you prolong it. You stay in the depression for a longer time, and it's really too bad that politicians succumb to political pressures at our expense, because this hurts everybody. So then you go on to say that people rely on these programs, the welfare state, and I agree absolutely. And I believe that if I could flip a switch tomorrow and just sort of shut the whole government off, we should. I think that would work fine. There might be a little chaos or whatever as people sort of reorganize, but when you consider, how absolutely brutal the government is on our economy, basically the government is a dead weight on the economy. I mean, taxes, the spending, all this stuff hampers economic growth. So if we got rid of it, within 10, 20 years, our society would be prosperous on a scale that we can't even imagine. Forget about 0.5% of growth in GDP. I mean, first of all, GDP shouldn't be used. It's a bad statistic. But we'd be talking about like 5-10% economic growth, higher even, 20, 30. Who knows? Because we wouldn't have the government holding us back. So basically, the government and everybody who collects a government check is a parasite on the productive private sector. So all these people would have to get jobs, real jobs on the market, creating wealth. So it's incredible how prosperous our economy could be. And yeah, you praise Reagan's bailing out of banks. Banks don't need to be bailed out. In fact, all banks are fundamentally insolvent. They owe more than they have. That's because of fractional reserve banking. And if it wasn't for the government constantly bailing out banks, they would all go broke because they're fundamentally insolvent. What we need is sound money, and we need 100% reserve banking. Basically, banks should be split into warehouse banks and investment banks, and then you wouldn't have this problem. So there's no problem with banks going bankrupt. I don't think that I should be taxed to give some billionaire banker, money on a bad deal he made. I don't see why the poor should be taxed to support the rich, certainly. You quote Adam Smith, and I'm not a fan of Smith. I think the Spanish scholastics, who were around 100 years, 200 years before him, were much better. So was Turgot. The French tradition was superior. Smith, for one, held to the labor theory of value, which is just laughably absurd. I mean, I could spend 1,000 hours painting a really crappy painting, but it wouldn't be worth as much as 100 hours of a skilled painter's painting, or a skilled painter's 10 paintings, right? Value is subjective. So Smith was wrong about a number of things, and he's wrong about regulation. He didn't found economics. He was influential in establishing economics as a separate discipline, but the history of economic thought goes back to the Greeks. So I don't hold Adam Smith as any sort of god or whatever. So examples of government monopolies. Okay, well, roads are the most obvious one. In my country, Canada, healthcare. You mentioned prisons. Absolutely. The private prisons are not private. First of all, you can't have private prisons. It's not something that would exist on the free market. Prisons are this absurd concoction of the state that we should enslave people and put them in chains and keep them in a jail. I've spent a little time in jail, and it's absurd. It's a terrible. I mean, it's inhuman, and sure, we have to deal with violent people, but in the States, I think half of the people in your jails are there for drug crimes, and I think that is just obscene, disgusting. And that's what happens with the government. You know, you get these horrible, immoral systems like prisons. So prisons are another. So these private prisons, they're not private, right? They're just outsourced. The government still collects taxes and gives them to these people. It's really no different than a government-run prison, because government-run prisons are for profit. The wardens get paid money. The guards get paid money. They all take home a nice profit, right? So I don't think outsourcing is the same as privatizing, even though you have, you know, what you're often just doing is socializing the risk and privatizing the profit, which is much worse than outright socialism, right? Because you got this you know, rich landowner guy who's leeching off everyone else. So the police, central banks, certainly the government monopolizes the money supply. You say the Federal Reserve isn't federal, but then why does the president appoint their chairman? The military, another example. Sewers, regulation of industry. This has been monopolized because this is something the market could do. Pension plans have been monopolized because if you're already forced to pay into one, you're not really going to be able to choose another. So these are just a few examples of government monopoly. Basically anything the government does, it monopolizes, because through coercive taxation, since you're already being forced to buy from the government, you're not going to be able to buy from anybody else unless you're super rich. So hopefully that covered most of the stuff. You know, we're branching onto a lot of broad topics, and I'm really enjoying this discussion. I feel like you approach it with intellectual honesty, and you know, I think we can disagree while still, you know, having a productive discussion. Hazlitt wrote about debate that it can be the biggest source of prejudice, and you know, I guess we'll both have to make sure that doesn't happen. And you know, I think I will check out your forum because you know, I'm enjoying this discussion, and absolutely have a great day.